Hello and welcome to the interview here on France 24. Our guest today is Pavel Filatyev. He fought for 2 months in Ukraine with the Russian army. He was then injured and he denounced in an account the military operation of Russia in Ukraine and the dramatic state of the army. Before fleeing, he arrived a few days ago in France where he's about to seek political asylum. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thanks for the invitation.
So, let's rewind a little bit. You published this account on internet. It's called ZOV. It's the letters featured on the Russian military vehicles. You then granted several interviews in Russia, and then you decided to flee. Why did you flee Russia?
When I published my book in Russia on internet quite openly, I wanted to attract the attention of Russians to what's happening currently in Ukraine. I wanted to describe quite simply as a participant to these events, describe what I saw and what I'd taken part in. Initially, my intention was to reach out to the Russian citizen. I wanted Russian society to react and that people should question what was happening, and also the command structure should ask questions about the problems that our army is experiencing in Ukraine. But unfortunately, a few weeks into my duty in Ukraine, I realized that I had no legal recourse to follow through. And when threats appeared after the first few weeks, I decided to leave the country, not to France. I had another destination in mind. But in fact, I was afraid, I was scared. I wanted to flee because I realized that if I was going to be put in jail, that they would have forced an admission out of me and denounced me.
Did you receive specific threats of arrest that prompted you to take that decision?
Well, in fact, a great many cases were initiated when people are accused simply of having called the special operation a war. And in fact, my story that I wrote is very threatening for the Russian command structure and the Russian leadership. And at the very last minute before leaving, I was informed that I was liable to 15 years in prison. And so I realized at the last minute that the Russian lawyers would not be able to defend me, and that in prison I would have to go back on what I'd said.
So there were several episodes. You were helped by an NGO and you end up in Tunisia. And there, you decide in the end to leave for France. What pushed you to leave for France?
Well, in fact, I was helped by an organization currently based in France and helps a great many people, people who are victims of humiliation and torture. And it's an organization called Gulag.net and fights against all these atrocities. I was in Tunis, and it's the services that helped me leave the hotel in handcuffs, and I was handcuffed, as I said, and escorted by the service.
You mean the Tunisian security services?
Yes, absolutely. I hadn't really understood that, but I eventually realized what was happening, and then there were other problems. They told me that I had to leave the country as soon as possible, whereas in fact I just had a mere tourist visa and it was quite legal. I didn't know what to do. I had no plans whatsoever. And I asked Vladimir Osechkin, who's in France and who runs Gulagoo.net, and he suggested I come to France and apply for asylum. And very fortunately, France didn't expel me, allowed me to speak out.
So, you end up at Roissy-Charles de Gaulle Airport here in Paris. You spend some time there, and you shoot a video of yourself where we see you tearing your Russian passport, your Russian military card, other official documents. Why did you do this? Did you have to show visually your break with Russia?
Well, in fact, it wasn't something that I'd planned to do at all. Up till then, my intention was simply to be a tourist here in Paris. And when I found myself in those circumstances, I realized that I'm at Charles de Gaulle Airport, and the Russian media say the West is our enemy, and I'm told that I was in fact forced to submit to these events and apply for asylum in another country, in spite of the fact that I'm a citizen and a member of the military. I've never broken any rules or laws in my country. I always wanted to be a citizen worthy of my country's society, and here I realized that I couldn't live normally in my country. So I was absolutely furious, and it's in that state of mind that I tore up the documents and did this video clip. I mean, I felt full of resentment that I'm forced to leave my country. I'm a former fighter, a serviceman, and I was full of resentment. And that's why I did this video, to show that our government doesn't represent our country. And I'm absolutely outraged to see that this government is acting not in line with our country's intentions.
But Pavel Filatyev, you are an isolated case. Russian soldiers are visibly not leaving their positions, and more generally, the Russians seem to be behind the so-called special operation in Ukraine.
I consider that that's just not true. Russians are not in favor of the special operation in Ukraine. The whole world sees an image that's shown by the Russian government. The Russian government has total control on all the media outlets and on internet, and is really claiming that it's an operation supported by the people. And we know that all elections are rigged at every level. We don't have any free media where we can express ourselves freely. So this government is presenting to the world an image where everyone's happy with Putin and his policy. That's just not true. A lot of people, majority of people, are unhappy, but they're afraid.
I want to go back to just before February 24th. You're based in Crimea, the 56th Airborne Parachute Unit. You were told. How were you informed about this special operation?
Well, to describe these events and to show how the Russian soldiers were confronted with this event and the way they were forced to take part. In fact, no one received any clear orders. Everything was just made up of rumors. There's the Russian army that doesn't comply with normal law. The law states that we should have been informed with a clear agenda provided, and military personnel have a right to refuse. And in fact, we were forced to move forward, to advance and to embark on an assault operation without there being a possibility to think about it. In the initial days, I saw the scale of the operation and didn't believe in a NATO threat directed at Russia and thought maybe it's just not true and that there's perhaps a massive threat directed by NATO against Russia. And a week into the operation, we were in Kherson, and we were told that we would be the victims of an attack by 2,000 NATO soldiers, including personnel from Poland, the UK, and other countries. But in fact, the information from the army was absolute minimum, and it was disinformation.
You fought in the south, in Kherson and the Mykolaiv region. We still have accusations of very serious crimes committed by the Russian army in Bucha and Borodyanka, more in the northern region. You've said before that you didn't see crimes committed against civilians where you were, but it's hard to believe that the Russian army would behave differently from one region to another.
Well, we of course must cast doubt on the fact that the US Army is either all good or all bad. In any army, there are criminals. There are criminals in the Russian army, and the Russian government has decided on its own army when the international community launched these accusations. The Russian government never took these accusations into an account to launch a internal investigation to clarify the matter. The fact that they refused to conduct this investigation led to this generalization, so we can accuse all Germans of fascism and accuse all Japanese of war crimes. But it's the government that is to blame, because it didn't explain things after a fully fledged investigations on the real criminals. As to my own regiment, I'd say that there's absolutely no proof, no evidence in the field of known media outlet that prove that our regiment took part in such actions, and I can answer these questions and submit to a lie detector test, and that live on your set, for examples.
Well, I don't have a lie detector on the set, but I do have another question for you. You have started political asylum requests here in France. Are you afraid for your life? You're under police protection. Have you received threats? You earlier mentioned the threats you got before leaving Russia. Are you in danger, Pavel Filatyev?
Well, I believe that as long as I'm not dead, as long as I haven't been poisoned by some nerve agent like Novichok, of course I wouldn't want that to happen, but we'll have no proof. I sense this threat, but I'm prepared to run that risk. I don't want to lie. I want my country to improve, and what I'm doing is in the interest of my fellow citizens. I want Russians to be brave and that they stopped having this attitude of being cowardly and waiting.
One very last question. You still have family in Russia. Are you worried about them? Because you're speaking out, you're denouncing things that are not acceptable, as you just said, in Russia by the regime.
I'd rather not answer that question.
Pavel Filatyev, I want to thank you very much for your testimony here on the set of France 24, and thank you for watching this interview. Stay tuned for more news.